They stopped him at gate C-27 like they always did, not with sirens or shouts, but with that quiet, confident suspicion that feels heavier than handcuffs, the kind that doesn't need evidence because it feeds on assumption. And as Captain Marcus Reed felt the cold palm of airport security press against his chest and heard the words, "Sir, step aside," he already knew this wasn't about protocol, wasn't about safety, wasn't about procedure. It was about the uniform he wasn't wearing yet and the skin he couldn't take off. And the irony was cruel enough to choke on, because in exactly 37 minutes, he was scheduled to walk into the cockpit of Flight 482, a fully booked transcontinental aircraft bound for Los Angeles, as the commanding pilot responsible for the lives of 183 passengers who were already boarding behind him, unaware that the man they trusted to fly them through the sky was being treated like a threat on the ground. And the story of how that moment unfolded would ripple through the city of Atlanta and beyond like a shockwave that exposed a system so confident in its bias it forgot to check the truth. Marcus had arrived early, as he always did, dressed in a simple navy blazer and slacks, his pilot's uniform folded neatly and his garment bag slung over his shoulder, his airline-issued ID tucked inside his wallet instead of worn around his neck, because he had learned years ago that flashing credentials too early made people defensive, and he preferred to move quietly, professionally, without drawing attention. But attention found him anyway when a TSA supervisor with narrowed eyes watched him, passed through the crew entrance, and decided something didn't feel right. A phrase Marcus had heard since he was a teenager walking home from honor society meetings. And within seconds, two security officers flanked him, their voices calm but commanding, asking for identification in a tone that already assumed guilt. And Marcus complied, calmly handing over his ID, his airline badge, his pilot license, explaining evenly that he was late for a pre-flight briefing. But the supervisor barely glanced before shaking his head and saying, "This badge could be fake," a sentence so casually delivered it almost felt rehearsed. And as they led him away from the gate in full view of passengers who watched with the uneasy fascination reserved for public detentions, Marcus felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, not fear, but frustration, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how this would look on a security report versus how it would feel to live through it. Inside a small holding room with blank walls and a buzzing fluorescent light, they questioned him like a suspect, asking why he was really there, how he could afford pilot training, where he was coming from, questions that had nothing to do with aviation security and everything to do with disbelief. And when Marcus calmly repeated his name and flight number and requested they contact airline operations, the supervisor smirked and said, "We'll get to that," as if time was something Marcus didn't deserve. While outside, the gate agent announced a slight delay due to crew availability, and passengers groaned, unaware that the delay was caused not by weather or mechanical failure, but by a man being doubted into silence. What the security team didn't know was that Marcus Reed wasn't just any pilot. He was a decorated Air Force veteran who had logged over 12,000 flight hours, a mentor in a national diversity aviation program, and the airline's go-to captain for high-pressure routes because of his flawless safety record. And what they also didn't know was that the airline's director of flight operations, a woman known for her zero-tolerance stance on misconduct, was already on her way to the airport for a routine audit. And when she received an automated alert that Flight 482 was missing its captain minutes before boarding completed, she did what leaders do when something doesn't add up. She asked questions, and those questions moved faster than the security team's assumptions. As Marcus sat in that room, listening to the muffled sounds of the terminal beyond the walls, he thought about his father, a mechanic who taught him that excellence was armor, about his mother who cried when he earned his wings because she knew the sky would treat him better than the ground, and he thought about how tired he was of having to be perfect just to be believed. And when the door finally opened, it wasn't with an apology, but with escalation, a security manager stepping in, voice firmer now, accusing Marcus of impersonation, threatening charges, ignoring the verified credentials now pulled up on a screen, because admitting error would mean admitting bias, and bias rarely backs down without force. That force arrived in the form of reality when airline operations called the security office directly, confusion bleeding into anger as they demanded to know why their captain hadn't checked in. And when Marcus's name was spoken on the call, the room shifted, the air thickened, the smirk disappeared, And for the first time since the detention began, silence fell heavy and undeniable. And in that silence, the truth landed like a verdict, because the man they had treated like a criminal wasn't just a pilot. He was the pilot, the one scheduled to fly the plane now idling at the gate. And panic replaced arrogance as supervisors scrambled, voices overlapping, suddenly polite, suddenly urgent, suddenly respectful in a way that felt too late to matter. They released Marcus with a rushed explanation about standard procedures and miscommunication. But there was no mistaking the fear behind their eyes as they realized the gravity of what they had done, not just delaying a flight, but violating a man's dignity in a secured federal space under cameras that recorded everything. And as Marcus walked back through the terminal, escorted now like an honored guest instead of a suspect, passengers stared again, this time confused, some whispering as he entered the cockpit and emerged moments later in full uniform, captain's stripes gleaming under the cabin lights. And when he took the intercom to address the passengers, his voice was steady, professional, and calm, but every word carried weight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. And there was a pause, just long enough for the moment to breathe. And I promise you, you're in safe hands. A line that drew spontaneous applause from the cabin, not because they knew the full story yet, but because something about the way he said it felt earned. The story might have ended there, a quiet victory at 30,000 feet, but true crime stories rarely do, because justice isn't just about correcting a mistake. It's about exposing the system that made it possible. And what followed was an internal investigation triggered by the audit director who reviewed the footage, the audio, the language used, the unnecessary detention, and compared it against protocol. And what she found was a pattern: multiple complaints quietly closed, repeated. Targeting of black crew members, informal gut checks, replacing documented procedures. And within weeks the findings went public, resulting in terminations, mandatory retraining, federal oversight, and a civil rights lawsuit that forced one of the busiest airports in the country to confront the cost of unchecked bias, not in theory, but in reputation, money.